Grace and peace to you from the God of mercy and grace and justice and love. Grace and peace to you from the God who keeps calling you further out into the places that you did not think you could go. Our gospel today is from Matthew. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water. And he came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord. So Jesus finally gets his alone time. If you remember last week, before feeding the 5,000, he was just trying to go somewhere to pray. And so he sends the disciples off and away, and finally he goes up onto his mountain and he has a chance to pray, to grieve, to be with God, and whatever that moment is of Jesus's prayer, it has got to just be so beautiful. But the night goes on and the wind picks up, and his friends, these sweet disciples, are off alone in this boat, and the wind and the waves are terrifying. And so Jesus goes to them. He walks across the sea on the water to the disciples. And upon seeing them, they are terrified. They are terrified to see this man that they love and trust and follow, but he is walking through the middle of a storm, across the top of the water. That's just not the kind of thing that normal teachers do. But Peter, God love him, Peter, he wants Jesus to call him to do the impossible too. He sees what love in action can accomplish, and he wants a part of it. Peter says, "If you call me, I can join you here." But he knows that it is the call of Jesus that is going to make this possible, and not his own faith. It is not anything amazing about Peter. It is something amazing about Jesus that makes this walking on water possible. He sees Jesus doing this impossible thing and believes, even for just a moment, that he gets to be a part of it. And with fear and longing pounding and alternating rhythm in his heart, he asks Jesus, "Command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus calls him. Jesus says, "Come." And for just a minute, Peter is there on top of the raging sea. For just a minute, Peter sees nothing but love holding out a hand. And for just a minute, he stands on top of the water, lifted up by love. But then he notices the wind, and he begins to sink, and Jesus, of course, catches him. Jesus, of course, saves him. And then Jesus says, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And I feel like the tone of voice that we give Jesus in the telling of this story matters so much. You of little faith. Is this really Jesus being disappointed that Peter can't walk on water like he can? This word, little faith, I'm going to probably butcher the Greek, oligopistos. And it shows up a couple of times in the Gospel of Matthew, oligopistos. It almost becomes like an endearment, a little pet name. Oh, little faith. Oh, kitten, oh, dear one. Oligopistos. If God clothes the grasses of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow thrown in the oven, will not God clothe you, oligopistos? Why are you worried about clothes, little one? Why are you afraid, oligopistos? There will be calm and plenty. Oh, oligopistos, why are you talking about not having bread? There is so much more abundance around you, oligopistos. You of little faith, do not worry, do not be afraid. Why do you doubt? And this word doubt means to be divided, to sort of oscillate between points of view, to not really land anywhere. To doubt here is to never really come down on one stance or the other. And so, of course, Jesus lifts Peter up. They get back to the boat, and everybody else in the boat is falling down in amazement and proclaiming that Jesus is the Son of God. While Peter sits there wet and shaking, knowing that for just a minute he did it. For just a minute he stood atop the raging sea, and for just a minute he saw nothing but love, holding out his hand for just a minute. His oligopistos was enough. And we see the complexity of this world. Even though we know it's hard to stay afloat when our focus is divided, there are more than 10,000 things calling for our attention. There's storms, rage, and the wind howls, and there are so many things to pay attention to. This word doubt of shifting positions, though, of losing focus, of taking a double stance. It is a stance of inauthenticity that is not just being distracted for a moment, but really not knowing where to look. Our attention is divided, and it is easy to say it is the storm's fault. It is the raging wind and the crashing sea, and the storms always seem like the real thing. But standing in the middle of this storm is love. And standing in the middle of this storm is love holding out his hand and inviting us. I think when we find ourselves in a position where we can say without blinking that we are equally concerned with the protection of life and property, we are looking at the wind. When someone says Black Lives Matter and you think that you are being invited to speak about anything, and particularly anything other than the sanctity of Black lives, you are only speaking at the wind. And if you can hear the value of children's lives being debated in relationship to the economy without screaming, then you may be paying a little too much attention to the storm. Because standing in the middle of this raging storm is love with arms open, ready to call us. Ready to call us of little faith, which may be all we ever get. But little faith, according to Jesus, is still enough to move mountains and walk on water. Oligopistos, Jesus will call to us. And oligopistoi, we can go to Jesus there on that water in the middle of the storm and see nothing but love. Even if it is just for a minute. Even if it is just for a minute that we focus only on love. Even if it is just for a minute, we can practice believing that love has got us, that the creator of all things is so delighted that even if we start to sink, love will catch us. I know my faith is not always so very big, and I know yours probably isn't either. My fellow oligopistos, we are not the impressive ones. We are not so very impressive, but love is. So let us take our little faith and let it move us. Let us take our little faith and use it to focus on the one through whom all sorts of miracles can happen. Let us take our little faith and choose a single stance of looking at nothing but love. Let us take our little faith and choose a focus on the outstretched hands of love in the middle of the storm. As Jesus calls us to the impossible, let us step out in love on behalf of justice for this whole world. Amen.